Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Zero Trust Club. This is episode 5. We're going to be talking about how Zero Trust can be made simple for businesses of all sizes. We're just essentially going to go over different types of security concerns small and medium businesses have and how you can address them with the Zero Trust strategy. My name is Tarun Desikan. I'm joined here by my colleague, Walter Driskell. Walter, do you want to do a quick introduction?
Yeah, good day, everyone. My name is Walter Driskell. I'm one of the solution architects at SonicWall, focusing on the cloud secure edge product. I'm based here in Chicago, right downtown. Looking forward to talking to everyone today.
So let's just give a quick recap on what Zero Trust security is, just provide some context before we dive into the demo itself. So Zero Trust, I know it's a buzzword, a lot of people use it for various different concerns, but in our context, Zero Trust refers to a modern security model. It's just a way of describing how modern organizations, how today's organizations secure their workforce. So historically, a security model for an organization was built around a firewall and a VPN. So if you are in the office, you got access to your internal resources. And if you left the office, you turned on a virtual private network or a VPN to connect to those resources. It was a pretty simple model. But as kind of our world has evolved, more and more resources are on the internet. More and more resources are delivered as a SaaS offering, like Microsoft 365. A lot of our infrastructure runs in the cloud, Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud. And also, many, many more of our workforce don't actually come into the office. We have contractors and developers. And so the essence is, what has happened is that what was a traditional security model that worked well for 10, 15 years has become incredibly complicated to manage. It's actually not really easy to use anymore. Users have to manually turn on VPNs, turn off VPNs, connect to different gateways. And worst of all, the bad guys are able to exploit the complexity, exploit the gaps in security, and kind of break into networks and break in and exfiltrate sensitive data. So Zero Trust is essentially a response to this. And the idea behind Zero Trust, and there are different components of a Zero Trust solution. You can see them here. It includes a VPN as a service. It includes cloud security, internet security. But the general idea is, depending on the type of resource, be they on-premise or in the cloud, be they be internet websites or software as a service, you use the appropriate technology stack to connect to them, and you explicitly authenticate and authorize that access instead of having this kind of implicit model that says, if you're on the network, you are trusted. So more specifically, how does a Zero Trust security model work? Now let's look at it from threats. So typically, most attacks today start by attacking the user. It might be a phishing email that takes you to a malicious website that then the user inadvertently downloads something that compromises their device. That's one way it starts. The other way it could start is if your credentials get compromised and a user gets access to your account. Regardless of how that works, essentially what happens is the bad guys now have access to your resources, be they in the cloud or be they on-premise. Another very common threat model is your credentials that got exfiltrated kind of get put on the dark web, and various malicious actors from around the world now use it to get access to your internal corporate resources. Once they get in, they kind of have unfettered access to everything in your network. So the bad guys can kind of move around laterally, hit sensitive databases, access administrated servers, and then start creating havoc from there. So this is kind of how a typical compromise occurs in an organization. And the way Zero Trust secures it is with a few different practical security measures. The first one is just URL filtering. See, in the past, if you operated from the office, your firewall could do this job. But today, you're accessing resources from a coffee shop, maybe at the airport. A solid Zero Trust solution will enable this kind of web filtering no matter where you are. That security model applies no matter where in the world you're accessing resources from. The second thing is, if your device were to get compromised, what happens? So most enterprises today roll out antivirus, EDR on their devices. A good Zero Trust solution will integrate with those and understand that if the EDR, if the antivirus gives a signal saying, hey, this device has been compromised, immediately access gets either restricted or even completely revoked. The problem with credential reuse is a tricky one, because your threat actors not only have your username password, oftentimes they can spoof your multi-factor as well. So a good zero trust solution will look at device posture. If only you come from an approved device that has the right level of assurance, is patched, is running the right firewall, is running the right EDR, only then you get access. And if you don't have an approved device, you don't get access. So if you have an unregistered device, you cannot access any corporate resources, even if you are a valid user. And then finally, we have more advanced techniques like passwordless that completely negates the use of a password, as well as completely changing all office networks into guest networks. And so a combination of these techniques is what is typically referred to as zero trust. And then in this webinar, we're going to go in and show you in the product how some of these techniques work. Walter, anything to add on this before we jump right in?
I think we're good. I'm excited to show it off.
Okay, all right. So let's start with the first one. Kind of the first scenario people talk about when it comes to zero trust is the one I mentioned. Hey, I've historically used a VPN. It's worked fine for 10 years, 15 years. What is this new thing you're providing? How does zero trust work? How does it replace or modernize a VPN?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll start. Let me just share my screen to kick that off. And so the first thing, well, first of all, we've got our head of the Zero Trust Club as my background. So for those that just want to know, that's the most knowledgeable one here. But Tarun, as you mentioned, people hear this term modern VPN, and they don't really know what that means. One of the first things that is kind of foundational to that is the technology that we use for our VPN. We leverage WireGuard. WireGuard is a modern VPN protocol, really designed for the world of people on the go, mobile devices, people that move around. Not to say that it ignores anyone that stays in an office all day. But in that situation, it allows for a very lightweight and very fast, highly performant capability around VPN technology. The second thing is we make this very simple to understand. And so you can see that we've got different services and things like that. But really, the idea is you just need to tell us what resources you want to send over that tunnel. That allows you to require only the necessary services and apps and websites and whatever they might be to go over that tunnel, the things that you need to secure. Once you've done that, you push this out to the users using our very simple policies. And our policies make that very easy. And we'll just take a look real quickly at that policy. We tie in with your existing identity provider, whether that's Microsoft, Entra ID, or anything else like Okta. Or others. Then, instead of building complex ACLs, I've got this group of IP addresses, and I need to make sure that they get access to these IP addresses, and I hope that I've got the right IP over here, and I've got the right IP over here, and things like that. Make it very simple, and we tie in with that existing identity provider, and we say these users that you already have a group built for, they get access to these resources. Or you can get as granular as one user gaining access to these resources. And you can see that then you can get into very deep customization around the access to these different resources. In our case, one of the core foundations of the SonicWall Cloud Secure Edge product is our trust scoring and trust capabilities, which we'll talk a little bit more about momentarily. But you can set different policies for different users for different resources. So one user may be required to have a high trust level to access a resource, while other resources may only require a low trust level, or even something may not require a trust level. You just need to make sure that they're a user that you want to approve access for. And so in that situation, that's what the admin side looks like. On the user side of things, we make that simple as well. So this is the SonicWall Cloud Secure Edge app. You can see that I'm not logged in currently. However, even in the background, we're still doing all that trust scoring or device posture checking, as it's sometimes called, in the background, and we're sending that information out to the cloud for us to evaluate. You can see in my case, we have a few different trust factors that we check on, one of which I'm not even passing. So that kind of shows you that we have these different levels of trust. You can customize each one of these to show you, to weight them differently. So maybe you want to make sure that everyone has the firewall or disk encryption enabled. And if they don't, they're not allowed to access anything, because in certain circumstances, if a device is taken off of a coffee shop or something like that, you want to make sure that that disk is encrypted so that the bad actor can't grab the information off that device in some way. And so we give you a lot of granularity around that. And we can talk a little bit more about those trust factors again when we talk about device trust. But really, that's what we mean when we talk about modernizing a VPN, being able to send the necessary traffic to the destination and letting the rest of the traffic, like YouTube and other things like that, just go where they need to.
And from the user side, Walter, how do they actually get access to those resources and so on?
Very easy. So in our case, we just need to click on a login button. The user is then presented with something that they're very familiar with, their traditional login prompt, whether it's for Okta in my case, or Entra ID, or whoever it might be. Once they click that login button, they get a message that says it's successful, and then they can easily go back to the CSE app if they want to, and they can see that they now have access to these different resources. We got a few things here, the service tunnel, and we've got a service catalog that shows users explicitly what they have access to. Again, that device trust is still always going on in that situation. And so you can see that now that I'm connected, any of the resources that I need to secure, I can now gain access to them. Real quickly, I'm going to show you what that looks like and how to secure Microsoft 365. That's probably our most commonly requested service that people want to secure. They've got...
Actually, that's kind of funny, right? Because a VPN means virtual private network. And historically, a VPN allowed you to connect to your resources that ran in your local networks.
Yeah.
But a very common use case in the modern world is actually securing access to Microsoft 365, which is unintuitive. But the reason is as follows, is Microsoft 365 is just available on the internet. If someone has your username and password and has a way of either spoofing your MFA if you have it set up, or just relies on the fact that you just click yes to everything that comes on your MFA screen, they have kind of unfettered access to your Microsoft 365. So as more and more corporate resources are using the cloud, using Microsoft 365, companies want to use Microsoft's native capabilities to kind of restrict access to Microsoft 365. Say, allow access to Microsoft 365 only from trusted devices. And Walter is going to show how we do that using, a more traditional VPN concept.
Yeah, for sure. So, Tarun, as you mentioned, Microsoft has a lot of capabilities around securing those critical business applications, Outlook, Word documents, OneDrive, all those different things, which can all be easily accessed by just going to office.com, right? And then, of course, credential compromise being the threat vector that it is, you want to be able to restrict down who has access to those resources. And so using Microsoft Entra ID's conditional access policies, you can very easily set up a policy that says only users can access my tenant of Office, Microsoft 365 when they're connected to CSE. And if they're not connected, then they don't gain access to those resources. So just real quickly, we have full documentation on how to set this up. But just to briefly go over this, you choose your assignment. So in this case, I have a specific user that's required to be on the tunnel. In my case, me. I choose what resources I want to restrict access to. In this case, all resources. And then I choose the conditions around the network access. And this is where CSE comes into play. So you tell us what resources you want to send over our tunnel, our service tunnel, and then you include, or you exclude rather, you include the rest of the networks to be blocked, and then you exclude. So we kind of do it backwards in this situation where specific resources are excluded, but the default permission or grant access is to block. So let me restate that. We're blocking everything except very specific networks. In this case, it's the SonicWall Cloud Secure Edge, global resources, global IP addresses in that situation. So once that's done, and this is turned on, you've now restricted down that threat vector and attack surface for your users. So I can demonstrate that real quickly. I'll actually pop into a private window just so that we're not transposing credentials here. And if I try to go to office.com, you'll see that first I just want to mention that you can see that I'm not logged in. So I'm not connected in any way to anything. And if I click on sign in and I log in with that user, you'll see that it tells me very quickly, I don't have access to this right now. It says my sign-in was successful, but I didn't meet the criteria to access this resource. So this is Office. This is kind of the front end for Outlook, OneDrive, everything like that. Now, I'm going to close this window, and I'm going to go back to my CSE app, and I'm going to click on Login, and I'm going to log into my account. And once I've done that, you'll see login successful. We can go back to the CSE app. We see that it's on. The service tunnel is enabled. I'm going to open up another browser, and we'll go to office.com again. And then we'll click on sign in. We'll use that same account. And you can now see that I'm able to access office.com. So just to summarize that, we use Microsoft's conditional access policies to restrict access to all of Office to specific IP addresses. Those specific IP addresses are the SonicWall Cloud Secure Edge IP addresses, our global edge. But that requires then as a user to connect to a service tunnel with Cloud Secure Edge. When they do that connection, they're validated for who they are, the device posture checks, and anything else that you may require for them to be connected. Once all that's satisfied, then they're able to access office.com. And you can see that it only took me as a user just logging into my CSE app at that point.
So Walter, are you backhauling all Microsoft traffic through a VPN now?
That's a great question. No, I'm not. So in our case, what we do is we tunnel only the login or authentication traffic. That's really nice and handy because Microsoft tends to get touchy about what types of traffic gets sent over a VPN, and if there's any type of weird latency, it may result in a poor user experience. This setup and method provides the best of both worlds. It allows for secure access to the resources because we're tunneling that authentication traffic, but the actual data plane is split out so that the user has the best experience possible.
And this, the one thing to add is, in the demo, maybe we didn't cover it, but CSE does have a global presence, points of presence. So even that authentication traffic goes to the point of presence closest to the user. And so the authentication flow is also seamless. Like you don't see any latency. And the old way of backhauling traffic back to a corporate headquarters, it's just a terrible user experience. And we don't recommend anyone do that anymore. The one thing you mentioned, Walter, in the demo was the concept of device posture. So one common policy you might want to have as a small business is, hey, you can access Microsoft 365, but your device must be running the approved antivirus, the approved EDR, some of those device posture standards. How do we implement that? How hard or easy is that?
Oh, it's super easy. So just to kind of start, again, this is the user side of things. So again, a user can see what their trust score is at any point. We provide remediation information to the user, which is handy if it's something simple. Maybe they don't have the firewall enabled or they have disk encryption turned off or something like that. We can provide specific remediation information for that trust factor so that a user can more often than not handle it themselves, re-enable that or turn it on or whatever it might be. And that can really help cut down on the number of support tickets that a help desk may need to field. Now, as far as requiring different trust factors, that's all done within our trust scoring section, our trust section rather. And you can really get quite deep and granular as far as how these are set up. So you can target specific OSs, and each OS has different criteria, right? In certain cases, iOS and Android mobile devices have different trust factors than Mac OS, Windows, Linux, or anything else. You can choose an ownership. So one of the things that SonicWall CSE has is the concept of device ownership. So I have a few different devices sitting on my desk. I've got my iPad, my iPhone, and my laptop. And the iPad and the iPhone are owned by me, but the laptop is owned by SonicWall. And I can have different requirements and different trust factors for those devices, which can then, in turn, give me different types of access to resources. So what that means is maybe my iPhone and my iPad, which I own, can only get access to email, but my corporate laptop, it gets access to all the OneDrive, the shared folders, everything like that, remote desktop, all those at once. And so very easily we can set up all that. And then to add those different trust factors, it's just kind of choosing which ones you want to run. So you can see that in this case, we are requiring the Sentinel-1 agent to run. And if we don't have the Sentinel-1 agent running, you can see that we just lower the trust factor a little bit. In other circumstances, if auto update is disabled or turned off, then we deny access altogether. So what that means is if I do have the Sentinel-1 agent running, but I have auto update disabled, I can't get access to anything. And again, you can pick and choose how these different trust factors affect things. So maybe you want to weigh heavily on certain things, but other things, not so much. And once you've set this up, all the different devices, they inherit this information automatically. And so you can see that, myriad amounts of trust factors in here. You can choose how these affect different devices, as I mentioned as well.
The only thing I'd point out is there is a default trust profile. Like if you don't want to worry yourself, we give you the ideal device trust profile that works with the broadest set of devices by default. And then you can add and customize as you need. But kind of the key thing for a zero trust deployment in today's environment, especially for small and medium businesses, is understanding which devices in your organization are accessing your resources. If you can keep track of that, you are maybe half or 75% of the way down to a more secure posture. A lot of modern compromise, a lot of modern threats happen because a user's credentials get compromised. So if you can combine the user's credentials with the device trust that Walter is showing here, that really helps you protect against maybe 80 to 90% of the threats that your organization is going to face. And what the point we want to make here is that we've made it dead simple. In the old days with the VPN, having to set up these criteria, you kind of needed to have all kinds of CCNA certifications, ICE with your Cisco AnyConnects running. It was very complicated. Here, we just make it a couple of button clicks, and you can roll out the security model.
Yeah, and one thing I like to point out here is people, when they move into Cloud Secure Edge, they get a little nervous about enabling these things kind of off the bat. And multiple steps along the way, we give you the option to set these up in a permissive or observational mode to start with. This allows you to implement or roll out different features and capabilities within the CSE platform, and over time, ratchet that security up so that it affects everyone, but you can kind of anticipate and work through any issues before you kind of flip the switch, so to speak.
Yeah. So maybe we can move a little bit just in interest of time, Walter. So we've spoken a little bit about device posture and the VPN, but as you know, most attacks actually come to the user either via phishing or malicious websites. Can you maybe show how easy it is to set up a simple either acceptable use policy or internet threat protection?
So within Cloud Secure Edge, we do offer internet threat protection. That is utilizing the same CSE app that we were just looking at. So one client to rule them all. Similarly, with our trust factors, we do offer a default policy so that you can kind of set up the best or the secure access for all your users, and then customize it as you see fit. So first, you'll see that we have a couple different things here. We have some filtering that you can set up. This is your traditional category-based content filtering. So if you wanted to block things like gambling or social media or different things like that, you can easily do that in here. Of course, you can also choose to filter specific domains or applications. So if you wanted to not block all social media, but block maybe TikTok, or you have a lot of users that are inadvertently using Dropbox on their corporate laptops, you want to prevent them from doing that, you can use the application filtering there as well. Conversely, if you have different sites that may be blocked as part of a category, for instance, you block all social media, but you want to allow LinkedIn or other resources like that, x.com, whatever they might be, you can choose your exceptions here. In addition to this, we have by default a bunch of threat protection enabled. As Tarun mentioned, phishing, all those different things. Phishing is by far the easiest way to steal anyone's credentials. And this is enabled by default. So we make that very easy for the users to avoid kind of getting caught in that booby trap every so often. And with that, we have the ability to block those command and controls, the crypto minings, all those different things as well, as well as a few others that you see here. And again, setting up assignment, everything like that, that's all very easy to do within the platform. You just choose which groups based on who they are within Intra, and that policy gets assigned to them. And then, of course, you can see all the different users that have that policy assigned to them as well.
Awesome. And what are some limitations? Do people make mistakes? If you mistakenly block a website and need it unblocked, what can you do about that?
Yeah. So the first thing, if you're unsure if a domain will be blocked or not based on a policy, there's always the lookup domain. Right? We make that very easy for an administrator to understand which category something might be in. So we'll choose the standard TikTok.co in that case, and you can see that it's part of a shopping because that's probably a spammy site. But if we choose TikTok.com, you can see that it's part of arts and social media. And it even tells you based on the policies that are in place, if it's blocked or not. In this case, it is. And then, of course, if you need to unblock or exception out something, we have those capabilities here as well.
All right, Walter, we have a question here.
Yeah.
Are there any features that are easy to use and set up, but not enough people are using? I think this is a great question, and I'm going to give my answer here, and then maybe you can give your own.
Sure.
I think just building on what you are showing here on internet threat protection is our SaaS application discovery. So, it's really amazing the number of shadow apps that IT doesn't even know about that your workforce is using today. So in the admin console that Walter is showing here, we have a field called App Discovery. And App Discovery is essentially all these different types of applications that SonicWall CSE catalogs for you that your workforce is using. Now, Walter, do you want to describe it a little bit more?
Yeah. So within the App Discovery, and I'll just kind of talk about what I did there. So these are the different apps that have been discovered. If I click on one of them, you can see that we give you a couple of different actions that you can choose on how you want to secure those. In this case, you can see that we have a few different options here. If you remember from our internet threat protection, we had Dropbox blocked. That's because it was identified. And then we had the option here to block it so you can manage it. You can say, oh, I block this using a policy or whatever it might be. So very easily, it gives you that ability to see into those shadow IT resources that you may not be aware of. And more importantly, a lot of tools do that, right? Like, here's this, here's this, here's this. We take that further and we give you the ability to do something about them, to take action on them, whether that's to allow them in certain circumstances or block them as well. I would say my answer to that, and I know we're mindful of time here, I think that utilizing the trust factors, the trust scoring that we've built into the platform, I think that's very powerful. Choosing and customizing your different trust factors. I talked a little bit about disk encryption. It sounds simple because it is, but a lot of people still don't enable disk encryption on devices. And if a device is stolen, then a thief can gain access to those resources. And if you have disk encryption enabled, then it makes that much, much, much more difficult. And so to require that disk encryption before a user connects to a modern VPN, I think is very powerful in and of itself. Of course, all the different trust factors add up to an incredibly impressive and powerful conversation.
Awesome. And if folks have any other questions, please post them in the chat. We'd be happy to take them on. About another one, Walter, is there something that is confusing, especially to smaller customers, that you think you can highlight here and explain why it's confusing and what are some common errors people make?
Yeah, I think that the traditional mindset is to set, people are like, the easiest thing for me as an administrator is to just tunnel all my traffic back to my firewall, send it out from there, and I'm done for the day. It's certainly the quickest thing to do in those old kind of, in those old configurations. We make the inverse of that just as easy. And we make the user experience that much better. We make the security that much better because you're not having to send YouTube traffic over a firewall for a user that may be 1,500 miles away or something like that. And instead, you focus on the important traffic that needs to go over a tunnel, that needs to be secured in some way. And with that, again, super easy to set up, super quick. You just tell us, I want this, this, and this, and off I go. And it benefits everyone in that situation.
I think my take on that is, if you go to access policies, my take on that is folks very often set up very simple access policies, which is a great place to start. But it is actually really simple to make them more complicated and really can be non-invasive. And so if you click on one of these policies, we have a mode called a permissive mode. So when you create a policy, by default, it's going to go into enforcing mode, which means it will actually block access immediately. But you can have it in a mode which is a visibility mode. Yep. So you can essentially make a policy and you can put it in a mode right there, enforcing or permissive. Mm-hmm. And so if you put it in a permissive mode, essentially you're testing, your user will not be blocked. You will just get an event. And that is a very, very useful capability. I'll give you a simple example. For compliance, you might have to lock down access to a certain administrative server that has, say, credit card information. And it can only be locked down to users who have administrative in their privileges. And that's a list of users. But you're kind of worried. You're worried that, hey, if I put this policy in place, all these other people are going to get blocked and they can't do their jobs and everyone's going to yell at me. Well, the way to solve this is to put everything into permissive mode. And then when you put something into permissive mode, Walter, can you just go into the event feed, or even here, if you just go into the access list, you will essentially see everyone who has accessed that resource right in the event feed. And you can very quickly filter by the specific resource or server or something. And you can very quickly identify, hey, these are the users who should have accessed it. These are the users who shouldn't have accessed it. Either let me expand the policy or let me go talk to those users and yell at them. And so I think using a policy in permissive mode is one of those features that I think is super easy to set up, but not enough people use in our product.
Yeah. One other thing I want to maybe mention on that. So, once you've set up, and obviously permissive mode, as administrators, we're always nervous about implementing something new. And then, day 0, set everything up. Day 1, brace for the phone calls. And I think with CSE, that bracing for the phone calls will probably be, significantly less than they normally are. We talk about this access and what it looks like, and maybe just real quickly kind of show what happens if something bad happens, right? So for instance, if I'm a user and I log in to a Windows machine via RDP or something like that, right? So I need to access this machine, and I'm a curious guy. I see a thumb drive on the sidewalk. Curiosity is going to get the best of me. I know not to, but what if there's a crypto wallet or something like that I wish was mine? I'm going to plug that into my device. Well, invariably what happens in those situations is that they may contain malware, and we can work alongside your existing SentinelOnes, your capture clients, different EDR solutions to actually detect that malware. And if that malware gets deployed, you can see that, in this case, I'm kind of setting up what it would look like if malware was deployed. You can see that as it runs, my RDP session dropped. And we'll go back here to my trust score, and you can see now that it's always deny. Well, what happened in that situation is malware was detected by my EDR. My EDR notified CSE, and CSE disconnected my access in real time. So that lateral movement that you were talking about earlier, Tarun, we can significantly reduce that and eliminate it with capabilities like this. So that malware doesn't get spread across the RDP session to the server that I was logging into. And all this is done in real time. And so if I go through and again, think about this in other circumstances, as I was mentioning earlier, disk encryption, firewall, those types of things. If I go through and do the remediation, or I go through and turn on whatever trust factor it might be, you can see that now my trust score is back up to its previous of medium, and I can get back into that Windows machine that I was logged into earlier. So again, that real-time responsiveness to threats and shutting down access to those private resources that need to be secured is, I think, something amazing.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot for all the different configurations and parts of the demo that you showed us today, Walter. And thanks everyone for attending the seminar, the webinar today. We really appreciate your time. If there's anything we want you to take away, it is that Zero Trust is not this complicated, highly invasive security model. It's now become very simple to set up, and it has real tangible benefits, both in terms of the security of your organizations and the cost of ownership. So please connect with us. Please reach out either on social media or directly through your SonicWall representative. We're excited to talk about the offering with you. And thanks again.